has become a strong advocate for transportation investment, solving the state's housing shortage, meeting our state's water needs, and other issues that impact California's economy and the construction industry. The Alliance for Jobs has particularly been a political force for increasing investment in our transportation and water infrastructure. The Alliance was a leading supporter in the successful 2002 campaign to pass Proposition 42, which dedicated state sales taxes on gasoline to transportation projects. Mr. Earp has been on the California Transportation Commission since he was appointed in 2007 by then-Governor Schwarzenegger. He was reappointed in March of 2011 to the CTC by Governor Jerry Brown. So if you gentlemen, have you decided who will go first, or is it okay? Good, good. I'm reminded that I need to call roll before we start the panel, so we'll call roll right now.
Daly.
Here.
Morrell. Mullen. Here. Nazarian. Wagner.
Here. Beautiful. Thank you, Genevieve, for the reminder. And we'll start with Dr. Shires. Welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk about this important set of issues. The state, as was mentioned before, has not really looked at this question in some time in terms of the deferred maintenance and the capital plans for the state, brought about in large part, obviously, because of the real fiscal pressures that the state was under. But I want to congratulate both the members of this committee, the legislature, and the governor for taking seriously at this point in time how to best prioritize those resources going forward. My role this afternoon is to kind of explain some of the interactions between this investment and our economy as a way of sort of setting a context as the legislature moves forward to set priorities for the scarce resources that are out there. I think it's important to note that the capital outlay plan included $60 billion, and the deferred maintenance plan, which I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about, has almost $65 billion identified just in the categories that are included. And it misses some important categories, things like water and schools, and some of our higher education institutions are not part of that. So the demands are large and real, and so the priorities that we have to set as we move forward are important. This infrastructure money, as we invest it in the economy, affects the economy in 4 different ways. And I just kind of want to do a quick explanation of those, and I'm happy to answer questions as we move ahead. The first are sort of the traditional things that we think about when we think about economic development. The direct benefits, for example, of spending $1 billion on construction for highways will produce $1 billion worth of economic activity for the construction industry that are repairing those highways. In addition to that, that industry buys, those are what we call the direct benefits. The indirect benefits, that industry goes out and buys asphalt and concrete from other operations, which in turn employ people and produce resources. And then and those are the indirect effects. There's a series of effects called induced effects. And induced effects are all those people now have more money to go buy goods and services, and they go buy groceries and cars and clothing and food and services. And those are the induced effects. And when you add all those things up, typically transportation expenditures and heavy construction expenditures of the type that we're talking about when we talk about infrastructure investment, produce about 0.75 jobs for every job that they create directly in the transportation sector, in the construction sector. And since most of this maintenance we're talking about is heavy construction kind of work, that tends to generally apply across this. What that means is, and the rule of thumb that has often been used in policy, is that if you spend $1 billion on this kind of infrastructure development, you'll end up with somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 jobs that are created directly as a result of it. And those are sort of the first 3 things that most if you look at an economic impact report, those are the things they always add up to come up to their numbers. But there's another aspect of all of this that infrastructure is unique in, and it's that it provides leverage. I always like to think of capital investment as sort of like the decision to buy your first car. You go out and your capital outlay is buying the car. It's either your savings or the loans that you take out to go out and buy the car. And then you have this sequence of maintenance things. You need to change the oil. You need to do the brakes. And that's kind of the operating costs of the car. But if you don't pay for those things, you accumulate what we now call deferred maintenance in public finance, which is, okay, now the valves are starting to go out because I didn't change the oil, and now it costs me a lot more to fix those things. And if I don't change the oil for a really long time, eventually the engine seizes up and I have to get a new car or spend a lot of money to replace the engine. And a lot of where we are right now is it's been a long time since we've changed oil in a lot of our infrastructure. And one of the things that a car allows you to do, and this is that fourth category of benefits that's unique about infrastructure investment, is it allows you to drive to work and generate money elsewhere that's not directly a result of your investment, but indirectly a result of the opportunity that that investment creates. And in the case of infrastructure, we have a lot of opportunities laying out in front of us. Our economy is starting to recover, although it's spotty and it's mixed in its recovery. And so as we look forward on the kinds of things that we want to invest our money in, one of the criteria that we might want to lay out there is things that will maximize economic activity in the state. What kind of investments can we make? And this includes not just deferred maintenance, but also capital outlay. What are the things that will produce returns to the state? Now, I emphasize deferred maintenance because I don't like my engine seizing up. And I think one of the challenges we have in the state, and this drought has been a great sort of amplifier, if you will, of these effects, is there are some parts of our economy that we haven't paid very much attention to. For example, we've spent a lot of time talking about a 100-year flood in terms of flood control and water and the levee system. We haven't talked about a 100-year drought very much. And one of the things we know about California is we have droughts. In the history of the state, we have many. The economic impact of losing a job in agriculture because we don't put water on the field is 0.8 jobs, in addition to the one job that you lose. There's roughly 500,000 folks working in agriculture over the course of the summer. That could be almost 900,000 jobs or indirectly. And so one of the things we want to look at is not only the positive returns on infrastructure, but where are our risks? Where are the costs? In economics, we call those opportunity costs. There are other sectors of the economy, things like the transportation and warehousing sector. The warehousing centers in the Inland Empire and the Central Valley. Those jobs produce about 1.2 jobs for every job actually in the industry. So for every truck driver, they're responsible for producing about 1.28 jobs. If you look at agriculture, it's 1.8. If we start to have issues with our grid and our infrastructure and power, and we start looking at things like the high-tech sector in Silicon Valley, one of the things to remember about construction is that they buy a lot of materials. And so a lot of the cost goes into those materials. In the service sector, they buy a lot of people. So each job in a place like Silicon Valley can be anywhere from 4 to 7 other jobs affected by losing those opportunities. And so as we look forward at the 5-year infrastructure plan that was proposed by the governor, there are a couple themes that come out that I just kind of want to point to. One is that as we invest this short-term money, I think that deferred maintenance needs to be a very high priority. And obviously it's up to this body to decide exactly what the numbers are in terms of the priorities. But understand we've invested a lot of money over the last 50 years in infrastructure. And a lot of key parts of our infrastructure, things like our university system, our water system, are 50 years old. And that deferred maintenance causes complete failure in many instances. If you're looking at things like the water projects, failed levees, failed infrastructure, failed dams, failed portals, failed pumps have a direct impact on the state economy. The other part of this, and again, this is why I think the drought is such an important amplifier, is to understand that what could come with the drought, we obviously don't know, is a pretty heavy fire season. In some ways, we were fortunate last summer that it was a quiet season. One of the issues that the governor does identify in his infrastructure analysis is that many of our fire camps and many of the base camps for our fire infrastructure to fight those fires are 50 and 60 years old and out of date with the technologies that they have. And then finally, and I think this is one for people who were involved in the public policy debates in 2001, our power infrastructure is absolutely essential. Not only does the drought reduce the amount of hydropower that we have available on the grid, but this could be, if it's a hot summer, a season when we have to move more and more power around the state. And one of the areas we really haven't focused much attention, and hasn't been part of the conversation, is that infrastructure to move resources. We know in 2001 a big part of the power challenges in Southern California had to do with one single line. Many of the issues around that line still haven't been addressed in terms of being able to reroute power in the state. And so as we look ahead, I think that the LAO offered 3 categories of priorities as they were talking about how we should prioritize our spending on both deferred maintenance and capital outlay. They offered address safety issues, reduce state liabilities, and prevent higher future costs. I would like to suggest that there are also two more criteria that we want to think about. The first is providing opportunity in the hardest hit areas of the state. And the second is to invest in projects that will maximize the potential not only for new economic activity and jobs, but protect those jobs we already have as part of our infrastructure.
Dr. Shires, thank you very much. I will encourage any questions now rather than wait for the panel to be completed. Are there any questions of Dr. Shires? I have one. What was the additional job creation number that you mentioned for manufacturing? Or you mentioned warehouses such as the ones around the Ontario airport. But what was that multiplier or factor?
Well, for warehousing, it's 2.28 jobs for each job in the sector. So
Okay.
it's an additional 1.28. It's a multiplier, right? So the first one is that job. So it's 1.28 additional jobs.
1.28. Agriculture was 1.8.
Correct. And then in terms of technology jobs, depending on whether it's service or manufacturing, it can range anywhere from 3 to 8. There's actually a few little industries that are as high as 10 or 12, but they're very small.
So for the first job created equates then to what?
Generally,
So one
rule of thumb is
technology
3 to
job
6.
leads to
3 to
somewhere
6.
between 3 and 6?
Yeah, is a good rule of thumb. And that kind of mixes in manufacturing with the software side.
Okay. Any other questions for Dr. Shires? Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Earp, you're on.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to offer a few remarks today on a very important issue, which is how do we improve and maintain the transportation, water, our educational and government facilities that we all rely on every day. Just a quick, the California Alliance for Jobs, we represent 2,000 contractors that are home-based here in California for the most part. 80,000 skilled union construction workers who build and maintain this infrastructure and who work for those contractors. I'm also bringing to bear my 7 years experience on the CTC, where we have been focused on delivering a $20 billion Proposition 1B program for the last 7 years or so. I want to commend the governor and the legislature for recognizing this critical responsibility that we have collectively to maintain and improve this infrastructure that we all rely on every day for our livelihood and for our quality of life. It's an important step, albeit a modest one. I say modest because although the plan identifies a broad range of capital and maintenance needs, as well as the near-term funding that will be tapped to begin addressing those needs, most of this funding comes from accounts or programs that are already in place and or are utilizing funds that were previously approved by the voters. Nevertheless, we cannot slay the huge beast of unfunded infrastructure needs without a plan and without pulling together the tools that we have at our disposal to fashion the more effective weapons that we're going to need down the road to accomplish this task. I think Mr. Shires has provided a great primer on, I think I should hire you. You actually be saying the things that we've been saying for years and years about the importance of investing in infrastructure as a positive impact on our economy.
You see there's one benefit of this hearing already.
Yeah, see, right, we're multiplying already, right? I would just add a couple more points for emphasis. Improving, expanding, constructing, and maintaining our essential infrastructure is one of the few real actions the government can take to actually generate jobs and stimulate the economy. There's a lot of things the government can do, but when it comes to actually producing jobs, you can't do much better than putting money down in infrastructure that has a long-lasting impact on our lives, on our economy, on the way we live and the way that we work. It's a great investment. He's pointed out some of the economic multiplying factors that happen when you use construction or when you invest in public works construction. And I think he also pointed out, which is something that I have talked about for years to help inform folks, is that the jobs that are generated, you know, when we think of construction projects, we think of the construction jobs, but the real impact is what happens when it filters through the whole economy. I've always kind of joke that construction workers are great for stimulating the economy because they don't really save a lot of their money for the most part. They buy they keep GM and Ford and Chrysler in business, buying pickup trucks and going to the store, getting groceries and maybe a little beer once in a while. But they spend the money. That money filters down. It gets through the economy and produces a lot of other jobs. And that's really one of the great things about the construction industry and about investing in our infrastructure. I would like to just highlight a few important examples of some things that are obviously in the hopper right now, and just give you an idea of just what they really entail for California. There's a lot of discussion going around about the Delta Tunnel Conveyance System, which is making its way through a long and involved approval process. That project alone will generate 129,000 jobs in California during an expected 7.5-year construction period. 14 of those are direct jobs, as Dr. Shire pointed out, the difference between direct and indirect and induced. 14 of those, 1,000 of those are direct jobs. 76,000 are indirect, and 39,000 are induced by a project of that nature. High-speed rail, non-controversial project. Everybody's on board with that. 66,000 construction jobs annually in the first 15 years of construction, and that doesn't include all the other indirect and induced jobs that project would create. Proposition 1B that I've been intimately familiar with, I chaired the campaign to get it passed back in 2006. More importantly, had the opportunity to serve on the CTC to make sure that those projects, or that funding, really was delivering for the voters, that they got what was promised to them. That project, that has been one heck of a great buy for the taxpayer. There's about $13 billion of that came under the CTC's purview, and that has leveraged $35 billion in matching funds from the federal government, from local governments, some from private sector. It has been a tremendous boon to California, provided a lot of jobs, just not only in the construction, but jobs and economic benefit that will last for years and years to come. And I can say personally, I know of companies that managed the worst downturn in construction over this last 6 years that are still in business because of Proposition 1B. That's the only thing that kept them alive, because the private construction market really collapsed here in California. So we didn't really sell it that way back then. We've always felt that public works investments is a great economic balance, a great stimulant, but we didn't really have, we didn't have a crystal ball. We didn't know what was really just around the corner when that measure was passed, but we couldn't have picked a better time to put it in place. So it has been a great boon. The silver lining in that, too, has been that because the economy was tight and contractors were very hungry, they were very competitive, and we delivered many more projects than we actually promised the voters. A lot of the contracts came in 20, 30%, some even more than that, below engineers' estimate. That money was plowed back into and brought additional projects up on the shelf and put them out to bid as well. So we had a lot of extra projects that were there's always more projects than money available. So we had all these other projects that didn't make the first cut, and some of those got to be in the first cut because of the way the money was recycled, so to speak. The other thing I would like to point out too is that I don't have precise metrics for this, but my experience has been that we spend a lot of time thinking about these mega projects. They do produce a lot of jobs. There's no question about it, a lot of economic impact. But if you look at it over the larger picture, there's actually more jobs generated from a lot of smaller projects that go out. These smaller projects, the maintenance projects, repaving projects, and even new construction projects, but not the 100 to $300, $400 million projects, but the ones that are smaller than that actually produce, when you look at the whole picture, probably more jobs, because there's just in the metrics of it, you get more people around these smaller projects Partly it's because a lot of the smaller projects don't involve as much of the money isn't tied up in environmental and other regulatory review that has to go on, especially when it comes to deferred maintenance and safety projects. Those projects already have a footprint. The money goes out on the street, so to speak, and employs workers. So you don't have a lot of money spent pushing a lot of paper. Now, I realize there's jobs involved in that too, but if you're really talking about construction, which is what I'm talking about, you get a lot more construction bang for the buck with these smaller projects. So there's a lot of benefit to that. It's a valuable asset. To be able to get that money out, and so we always want to think about. I understand the natural inclination of the legislature and the governor to want to leave a legacy, to be able to point to big things that they made a difference on, and I don't minimize that. I'm a staunch supporter of a lot of those. We're solidly behind what we need to do with our water system and with our high-speed rail. We feel that that's a visionary and a transformative project down the road. But really, we can't leave behind. We don't get to that future world by leaving behind the infrastructure that we have in place today. And we have a huge. It's basically we're digging ourselves in the hole to the tune of $6 billion a year, just trying to maintain the 50,000 miles that the state is responsible for. When you let a road get to the point where it has to be reconstructed as opposed to just maintained on a timely basis, it costs 10 times as much money to do that. So it's really a better deal all the way around. It's never fun, but you gotta if you spend the money and keep that road well maintained, it lasts longer, keeps more people employed, and it's just a better use of the taxpayer's dollar. Last point that I would like to recommend as you think about budgetary items. I was involved several years ago during one of our annual budget crises that we've had for quite a long time until recently, in what was known as the gas tax swap. It was somewhat of a complicated thing. I don't even want to try to explain all of the different pieces in it, but the net benefit to the transportation community that came out of that was that it took the sales tax on gasoline and made an equivalent excise tax out of it, so that it, in a sense, removed that part out of the general fund battles as well. And that was not a bad thing. And then we put in an annual review of it, so to make sure that over time we didn't lose traction in terms of what the sales tax would have generated. The Board of Equalization takes a look at that once a year, and if the price of gas goes up a certain amount, then they kick that in terms of a higher excise tax. But the reverse is also true. This coming year and the year after, they expect the price of gas to go down, and so there's going to be a decline in that. And so there was a lot of fuss made last summer about the 3 cents or so that the gas tax increased, but I will be interested to see if the Board of Equalization makes as big a deal about the 3 cent decline that they're going to implement most likely this year. The last piece of that, though, the piece that the legislature was looking for was some funding to help backfill the general fund, and so that turned out to be the truck weight fees. There's about just a little under $1 billion a year collected from for those who own and operate trucks. That money is historically being used directly. It gets plowed directly into the Caltrans SHOP program, which is to fix our roads. It's a good program because trucks put a lot of stress on the road, and so putting a little extra money there from that industry it makes a lot of sense. We gave up that at the time in order to help solve budget problems. The thinking was that, well, we're going to put that money into transportation bond debt. So in a sense, it's still transportation. Well, that's fine temporarily, but I didn't think any of us anyway on our side of that discussion thought that was going to be till kingdom come. So I think with the budget in better shape, the economy starting to pick up, this is a good time to revisit that. That's $1 billion that could be plowed back into maintenance projects, rehab projects, and it's money well spent. It's where the money should be ultimately, and I think this is the time to look at that.
Thank you for that closing point. That's very well taken. Would you, you mentioned Prop 1B and the leveraging that occurred, and I didn't write down the multiplier, if you use that number, but when you, with the federal and local match.
Yeah, it basically was $13 billion from Prop 1B made possible $35 billion in projects.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Members, any questions for Mr. Earp? Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both for the presentation. I'm a true believer when it comes to infrastructure investment and the maximizing potential. The data is clear on that initial investment, the job creation elements, the ability to maximize economic activity on the front end when the investment is made, then the multiplier effect. How do you go about quantifying the ongoing economic benefit beyond the construction phase of a project? You have a road that's in better shape. What is the business or economic benefit of that, which, you know, I mean, it's common sense to some degree, but how do you go about quantifying the long-term economic benefit after the construction, after the money is let, after the money is spent, but ongoing? How do you even come up with a model to quantify that? Because, you know, when you're talking debt service, you're paying this off over years and years and years. You want to know that there's still a benefit being realized.
You should do that one.
The answer is it's very difficult to do. One of the challenges you have in economic modeling is you don't know what would have happened if you didn't do it. And so one of the areas that we're able to look at that in some ways is what happens when you don't do things. What happens when an industry goes away? And in those cases, it's fairly simple to measure the direct impact of those industries. There have been some attempts to do it in the econometrics literature. It's obviously somewhat controversial. And it depends on the project in terms of, I mean, if you're building a brand new piece of infrastructure to a new development, those costs are very easy to identify. The answer is being able to go to the taxpayers and say this is how much it produces is very hard. It's kind of like asking what's the value of the University of California? Well, we have biotechnology, we have Silicon Valley, we have aerospace, we have a lot of things that we know are related to it. What we don't know is how much the public investment returned on that. So I wish I could give you it's 23%, but the reality is that it's not only just common sense, but it's always asking yourself, would this have been here if we hadn't?
I would like to add, I think I'm glad you said it that way, because we've never been able to figure out how you quantify it, but the anecdotal experience of it is just so obvious sometimes. Just one small example. Shasta Dam, built back in the beginning of World War II. Originally it was going to be a couple hundred feet higher. They didn't stop it because they didn't stop building it where they did because of regulations or anything. They stopped because they ran out of concrete. And the war was starting, and they needed some of that for for other purposes. So they capped it off a little shorter than they originally intended. But how do you quantify what the benefit of the water that has been made available, the flood control benefits, and even the electricity that has been made available from that one piece of infrastructure over all of these decades? How many farms have been able to proliferate? How many different businesses have been able to happen? The Silicon Valley uses a ton of water. And that's just one piece of infrastructure. And when you start to multiply that with other kinds of infrastructure and other ones like that, including the California Water Project, it's really hard to quantify it. You just know instinctively there's a whole lot of people living and working here that wouldn't be here if we didn't have that stuff in place.
Mr. Wagner.
Thank you. I'm perhaps a little confused. I hear that the governor's 5-year plan is, to use your phrase, Mr. Earp, a modest step, and that the mega projects don't generate the same jobs as some of the smaller projects. And I think of two mega projects, high-speed rail, and I think of the Bay Delta tunnels, which at this point haven't created jobs for anyone except lawyers and bureaucrats. What's the sense in your minds, of continuing to spend on those mega projects when we get more bang for the buck and the needs are overwhelming for the smaller projects? And by your own definition, what we're devoting to these smaller projects is modest. Might it not make sense for this legislature to bite the bullet and say, visionary or not, those projects have to wait while we fix the roads that exist and fix the bridges that exist and give the money to the UC system and the CSU system so it can move its facilities into the 21st century? Might that not be a better way for us to spend our money?
Well, first, unless I'm mistaken, unless I didn't read it right, I don't think the governor's 5-year infrastructure plan has a lot in it and concerning the Bay Delta plan. That's a separate investment. Secondly, when I'm talking about what they generate, those big jobs generate a lot of jobs. If you're going to break it down per billion spent versus a lot of other projects, sure, there may be a case to be made that a lot of other projects spread out will produce a few more jobs. But it's not just about the numbers. The reason that project needs to be built is we don't have a working water system without it. It's as simple as that. It's not just about the money. Is it expensive? Yeah, it's really expensive. And it's more expensive every year that we wait. But we have a water system in California that was designed for about 18 million people and it's serving 38 million people. It's not going to cut it anymore. And we've been deferring that decision to do what needs to be done for years and years.
If that's not in the plan, let's talk about what's in the plan. If it's not the Bay Delta, we can argue that separately. What about high-speed rail and the forced march in that direction? If modest though it is and more jobs are in other places, isn't that a better way to spend our money?
Well, if you had X number of dollars and you said, okay, we either spend it on a high-speed rail or we spend it on roads, then you have to make a judgment call as to where you're going to spend your money. So, I'm saying that you can't make a judgment call and say one or the other. I'm saying you need to do both. There may be others, including yourself, that don't want to make that choice.